All of our panelists are here tonight. Bobby Steele is also here, although he's not sitting up at the table. He'll be coming up when it's his turn to speak, so let you know. I'd like to start tonight by saying that I think there's a lot of lies that are out there right now about the death penalty. There's the lie that the death penalty deters violent crime. There's also a lie that such a brutal practice could ever in any way be fairly applied, especially in a society like ours, which has so much discrimination and so much poverty in it. There's the lie that, in fact, the death penalty has any role whatsoever to play in a humane society. And there's also the lie that everybody that lives in this country is somehow for the death penalty. And what we're here for today is to say that everybody is not for the death penalty. We oppose the death penalty, and that there's many more people that aren't in this room tonight who we know stand with us this evening as well in their opposition to the death penalty. Want to show that we oppose the death penalty, but because if we want to put an end to it once and for all, what we need to do is build a movement, an activist, grassroots movement that can actually abolish the death penalty once and for all in this country. And I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. I'd like to welcome everyone to get involved in a new abolition movement to end this practice of the death penalty in the United States. Once again, I welcome you. My name is Catherine Dwyer, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. We have a great group of speakers tonight, all of whom are long-term fighters against racism, against brutality, against injustice, wherever it comes up in our society, and of course, against the death penalty. We also, in addition to the people that will be speaking from the panel, we have a few people who are going to be making announcements or comments from the floor. People should have a copy of the agenda, which gives the list of people who will be speaking. And unfortunately, because we have so many people here that are going to be speaking, we won't have time for question and answer or discussion from the floor this evening. But I do hope that people see this as a first step in a process. People will also see on their chairs that there's a meeting. There's an organizing meeting for people who want to get involved in the campaign. People should have this flyer, as I said, on their chairs. Next, there will be a general meeting next Monday the 6th. There will also be meetings on several campuses for people who want to be involved in building the campaign on a campus. There's just one change here. The Queens College meeting will be in the student union. There's a little typographical error there. So I hope, like I said, people will get involved. There's also on your chairs, there should be copies of a blue card that says that if you'd like to get involved in helping to build a campaign, we need everybody's effort, no matter how great or how small. Every person that's here is vital to building this movement to abolish the death penalty. There's also, if people would like to fill out those cards, at the end of the meeting, there will be people collecting them at the 2 doors, and there's also a table right outside the door for people who can hand in those cards so that people from the campaign can get into contact with you. There's also going to be some buckets going around the room to collect some money. People know campaigns like this take funding to actually create. If we want to bring this beyond this room, we have to have flyers, we have to be able to get speakers around, we have to print literature, we have to get organizers, we have to pay for things like this room tonight. And so if people can contribute, that would be most welcome. And again, however much you can contribute would be very helpful. So I'm just going to tell people a little bit about our speakers, and then we'll get on with it. Tonight we have several speakers, and I'll just go through the list. First of all, we're going to have Manning Marable speaking. He's the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. He also teaches in the political science and the history departments. And he's also the author of several books, including Beyond Black and White, which is his most recent book. And of course, he's a long-term activist as well. We will have second tonight, we're going to have Lawrence Hayes. Lawrence is a former member. Lawrence is a former member of the Black Panther Party. He was a death row prisoner himself, and again, he is a long-term activist, both when he was in prison and now that he is out. Third this evening, we're going to have Leonard Weinglass. Of defending people who are facing government repression. He was involved in defending Bobby Steele back in the 60s, and now, of course, he's the lawyer for Mumia Abu-Jamal, who I'm sure who's most recently taken on the fight against Pataki's dismissal of Robert Johnson, who's the Bronx DA that actually said that he didn't want anything. Next we have Chuck Culhane, who's also a former death row prisoner. Both within the prison system and outside of it as well. And then we'll have Bobby Steele, who most people probably know. Bobby Steele, as people know, is the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, and that speaks for itself. Next we have...
What was called debt peonage. You were tied to the land as peons. You had convict leasing in the Deep South 100 years ago, and chain gangs. What held that system of racial and class oppression together was the 19th century version of the death penalty, which is lynching. From 1880 to 1929, you had over 5,800 African American women, men, and children who were lynched in the American South. What do you have in the 1990s? You have class domination and racism. You have the polarization of wealth and power and privilege in a smaller and smaller number of people's hands. In 1991, the top 1% of all U.S. households had a greater net wealth than the bottom 95% of all Americans. And when the top 1% has more than the bottom 99% of anything, I don't know what you call it, but I sure as hell don't call it a democracy.
Yeah.
And so, in the environment of class oppression, in the environment of widespread unemployment, in the environment where 40 million Americans lack any form of medical care, in the environment where you have several million people who do not have housing in this country and who are homeless, in the environment where you have racist attacks against affirmative action, you have racist attacks on Proposition 187 in California, you have racist attacks in undermining educational access and opportunity for Latinos and African Americans and other people of color. How do you create the glue that holds together that system of oppression, that system of power, that system of privilege? And the answer to that is the criminal justice system. Between 1980 to 1990, the number of police in the United States doubled. As of 1995, there were 554,000 officers employed by local and state police forces. In addition, there are an unbelievable 1.5 million private security guards employed to guard office buildings, corporate headquarters, affluent neighborhoods all over this country. This ties in with Clinton's 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill. You have the beginnings, in effect, the extension of a police control apparatus. The crime bill's draconian provisions included $10.8 billion in federal matching funds to local governments to hire 100,000 new cops over the next 5 years, $10 billion for the construction of new federal penitentiaries, an expansion of the number of federal crimes to which the death penalty is applied from 2 to 58, a so-called 3 strikes proposal mandating life sentences for anyone convicted of 3 felonies, a section allowing children as young as the age of 13 to be tried as adults, and the creation of special courts able to deport non-citizens allegedly for engaging in, quote, terrorist activity, unquote, on the basis of secret evidence. And the list goes on. Even more striking is the reality of who was in prison in the United States. In 1983, I wrote a book called How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America. And in that book, the chapter that people cite to me more than anything else is the chapter on the criminal justice system. I said 13 years ago that the United States had the second highest penal incarceration rate in the world. We had 650,000 women and men incarcerated in the U.S. We were second only to South Africa. Today, in 1996, that population in prison is no longer 650,000. It is over 1.5 million. We are doubling the number of people in American prisons every 7 years. We are building 200 new prison cells in the United States every single day. Prisons have become one of the largest corporations in the United States. As a matter of fact, compared to the Fortune 500 corporations, other than General Motors, the corporation in the United States that employs the greatest number of people is the U.S. prison system. Who is in prison? 1/3 of all prisoners were unemployed at the time of their arrest. Blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, and whites. 1/2 of all African American prisoners were unemployed at the time of their arrest. Others averaged less than $12,000 annual income in the year prior to their arrest. Who is in prison this evening? 1/2 of all the prisoners in the United States are African Americans. 1/3 of all young black men between the ages of 18 to 29, as I speak here to you this evening, are either in jail, on probation, parole, or awaiting trial. The criminal justice system is indeed criminal because it is the chief means of warehousing unemployed and underemployed Latino and black youth. And that is the purpose of the criminal justice system, to ensure social domination, to ensure social control, to ensure the dynamics of economic exploitation. So what do we do about this? The real challenge ahead is building a broad-based democratic movement that makes the connections between the crisis in the corporate capitalist political economy with the crisis that we see through which the system tries to manage issues through the criminal justice system. And very much like in the 19th century, when you had Jim Crow and shared profit and exploitation, you had lynching in the 19th century. The lynching of the 20th and 21st century is the death penalty. The death penalty is the key. The death penalty is the key to the dynamics of carrying out oppression through the criminal justice system. If we are able to uproot and destroy the death penalty, we hit a body blow against a structure of criminal justice that is designed to ensure black, Latino, poor people, working class oppression. And so tonight, we're going to talk about the issues of the death penalty. We're going to talk about what your stake is in the fight against the structure of power, the structure of oppression represented by the criminal justice system. And if we understand our relationship to the democratic struggles of history, if we see ourselves as a part of a broad democratic movement fighting against class and racist and sexist injustice, then without a doubt, we shall triumph. We shall overcome. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Important that you were here, and on behalf of all of them, thank you. I spent 2.5 years in the death house myself, and I know what they're going through. I know what the way is. So thank you. Give yourself a hand. In 1968, I joined the Black Panther Party. I believe more so than anything else in power to the people. That slogan drew me. That slogan gave me a place to be. It became my peer group. Another thing that interested me about the Black Panther Party was that they stood up to the occupation forces, the police, who as a young, well, cotton candy, snotty-nosed kid, you know, watched as they kicked in doors in my neighborhoods, as they drug fathers out of the house, slapped mothers, and pushed children around. That was criminal, and the police was doing it. And when someone stood up to them, I said it was about time and I wanted to join them. So I joined the Black Panther Party. But when I joined the Black Panther Party, I found myself involved in setting up and assisting to run educational programs, Black Studies programs, basic Black Studies programs. I mean, I didn't even know back in the 60s that animal was black. I didn't know about G. Carter Woodson. I didn't know about many of the African Americans who had made major contributions to the development of science and other aspects of American life and history. I didn't know that, and I discovered that. And so I was being educated. We also set up breakfast programs. And I believe that that came out of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. It was a very scientific type thing that we were involved in. We set up breakfast programs because it was discovered that children had a hard time learning if they were hungry. And we set up clothing programs where sisters sat hour after hour before sewing machines, producing shirts and pants so that kids wouldn't feel inferior in the classroom because of the clothes they had on and therefore missed their lessons. Today, the legacy of the Black Panther Party lives on. I'm a case manager. I'm a case manager at Bed-Stuy Community Conference in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And I feel very good about referring a single mother to a daycare center so she can try and get herself together, go to school and get some education and or go to work while her child is being taken care of. Before the Black Panther Party institutionalized that in our communities, we didn't have that. So it is a part of the legacy. Let me give you some of my personal experience about the death house, or being sentenced to death. As a young African American back in 1968, 69, I was assigned to a very great man. I don't want to mention his name now because he's still out there and he's still doing some good things. And he's like the spook who sat by the door as far as I'm concerned, you know. But I was assigned to him, and he gave myself and several other young brothers jobs at I-55 and 271, which were experimental schools in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. I was into martial arts, so he created an after-school martial arts program where we instructed in martial arts, self-defense. He also was the one who taught us how to set up the breakfast programs and assisted us, how to get funding for them. He also helped us develop the Black Studies program, the basic educational programs that we ran. And it was a wonderful experience. But then a thing called heroin began to plague our streets. And heroin, believe me, was brought to you by COINTELPRO. And so me and my little crew, you know, we were souped up. So we decided, well, okay, what we're going to do is rid out the community of drugs. It was a reactionary response. We didn't confront anybody. We didn't go seek the wisdom of those who were educating us. We just went on out there. And we began, we went on the corner of Howard and St. Mark's, where all the drug dealers hung out, selling their drugs. And we went to fight them. Next thing you know, we found out the thing a little more complicated. But then we had learned about dialectical materialism. So we went back to the drawing board. And we said, they got guns. So, I mean, we did what we had to do. We got guns. Because it was our objective to stop, primarily, naive as we were, the murder of young African-American children. Sound like Bigger Thomas, doesn't it? And Native Son. Just stumbling about. But then, in 1970, we met this guy, we were introduced to this guy, and he had been in prison for 5 years. He used to be a drug courier, he said. And he knew about these spots where drugs and money met at the same time, and that, you know, we could accomplish a great deal. So we went on, and he used to set these places up, and we would go in, and we would do what we did best. You know, at that particular time, we would take the money, dump the drugs, and filter the money into some of our programs and put some in our pocket, and, you know, we did what young African-American males would do. Then one day, on August 21st, 1971, two of my comrades went into a luncheonette. They were doing surveillance. And the next thing I know, I heard a shot. I heard 2 shots. And I ran to the door. And my friend bumped against me, my comrade. And he ran past me, he bumped, and when he bumped, he said, So I knew something was wrong. And then another one ran past me. As I looked, I saw this guy standing there, and he just fell over. So I turned around, and I saw my friend fall in front of a tree, and I went and I reached for him. And as soon as I bent over, I mean, I thought the whole arsenal of the United States Army was on me, because the tree only disintegrated. So many people were shooting at me from so many places. And somehow I got away, but I looked at my friend, and he was not, he was shot in the upper shoulder. And I actually envisioned seeing him in a hospital somewhere. And so we left. When we got back to Brooklyn, we saw it on the newspaper, that the newspapers all on the TV that, and a police officer, off-duty police officer, had been shot. And suddenly, we began to think. And of course, the first thing to do was put some distance between you and whatever the location of this place. So that's what I did, and I tried to get my nephew to do the same. Word got back that they had raided my sister's house, and they had told them that if they catch us, they were going to kill us. And I believed they would kill us, because I had seen the brutality and viciousness and violence of the police officers in my community. So it was hightail and run. So I ran, and I went to the Canadian, I was headed for the Canadian border. I remember doing slavery, that's where we went. You know, I mean, so I headed there. And at the border I was arrested. Because I didn't do my ID up there, you know, it was really CIA. So at any rate, I was taken to trial. First I was taken to Plattsburgh. Anyone knows Plattsburgh, Clinton Correctional Facility. There's a lot of racism that goes on there. I was tied to a chair, similar to the chair that one is strapped during the death penalty. And I was beaten. I remember being beaten so bad that I just knew, I mean, my head was like jerking back and forth, but everything happened in slow motion. And I was finally taken to, I was flown back to New York, and I got off at LaGuardia, and was taken into the precinct of the officer who was killed. And I was beaten again. Finally, I was signed a lawyer. I went to trial, and trial was over. I had an all-white jury, all male, average age 55, out of Queens County. And I studied a little history out there. I got in prison I remember the age in New York that was called the white flights. And I remember where those who were racist, who didn't want to be around people with complexions like myself, went to. They went to Queens, Staten Island, Long Island. So that told me something. And a year after I was in the death house, the district attorney in my case, Godelli, was disbarred for taking bribes from organized criminals. A year and a half after I was in the death house, the judge in my case was cited in a New Yorker magazine article by Jack Mooney, investigative article, as being one of the 10 worst judges in New York State because of his favoritism to organized criminals. Sound like Bigger Thomas to me. And so, I guess God willing and people who struggle like ourselves being right here today, the Supreme Court of the United States abolished the death penalty in Fleming versus Georgia. And I have to give thanks to Chuck, because I didn't know. I mean, Chuck and Gary giving Chuck Cohane, they sort of kept me informed of what was going on. I thought I was going to do any day. But they kept telling me, no, man, it's such a thing to stay on the field. You know, I want to tell you about the human aspect of this. Who was it? Dick Gregory said, America leaves the world in shock. And that's what happened to me as a human being. It was one state of shock to the next. I was just an object. And everybody was talking about this object, and no one asked me a single question or printed a single word that I had said. I was just an object. People read about me, and when I saw them, I used to go back to the prison in Rikers Island, and they'd be telling me about me. You know, they didn't want to. I mean, what the newspaper printed was God sent. That's what it was. It got so to the point that I began looking for the object. When I was in the death house, any psychology book I could get a hold of, I read. Because I wanted to try and understand me. Where was I at and all this stuff there? What was wrong with me? So, I mean, this is the type of experience a single individual goes through. I don't know if any of you have read any literature that came, any psychological literature that came out of the Nazi Germany camps. Battle Hymn, Sullivan, Jack Sullivan, they did quite a bit of research in that area, and they sort of equated to slavery. But the two elements that they noted most of was shock, and they also noted a splitting personality based upon that shock, that the individual being overwhelmed so much by the pressure of the state tends to separate his personality or their personality to try and say it's not happening to me. They're talking about someone else just for the sake of survival. The death house experience, I mean, Chuck can testify to this. I think the death house experience can be sort of summed up in one of these, an experience I had in the death house. I was in the martial arts, I was in the Eastern philosophy, and meditation was something that I leaned towards. So I was sitting on the prison death house cell bunk, looking out the window. I don't know, I guess the fascination of light coming through wire mesh windows, bars, and they sort of fascinated me. And so I just sat there and meditated on the rays of light that somehow found their way into this place of darkness. And this officer came about. I mean, first he was just a silhouette. It blocked out the light. He came to the cell bars and put the sandwich on the cell bars. He says, look, this is from the guys back there, meaning Gary or Chuck. And so I went up to the bars and I picked the sandwich up. But I like, you know, something about me. I like ketchup, and you know, I mean, I was one of those snotty nosed kids with, you know, cotton candy smile, you know. And so, I mean, I have my preferences. And I like to smell the aroma of fresh meat. So I like fresh meat. So I wondered if there was any ketchup. I opened it up, and it's a dead mouse. I mean, I jumped. I did everything a human being would do. I threw it out and jumped back. Over all the excitement, there was this horrible laughter. That was the Death House experience. You know, it was, I could take advantage of you in any moment I wanted. That is what over 3,000 men and women are going through each and every day as we stand and sit here today. Your presence here is very important, and I hope you will continue to struggle for life and denounce death. Having said that, I shall leave with a quote from one of the greatest abolitionists this country and perhaps the world has known, Frederick Douglass. Slavery has been fruitful in giving itself names. It has been called the peculiar institution, the social system, and the impediment. It has been called by a great many names, and it will call itself by yet another name. You and I and you had better wait and see what new form this monster will assume, what new skin this snake will come forth next. It's a contract on America. It's a contract on us.
People who are angry about what they've heard here tonight, who want to get involved, fill out those blue cards, play a role, become a part of this new movement to abolish the death penalty. Everybody has a role to play. And also, there are buckets going around for collection. People should know this room tonight, just holding a meeting like this costs, well over $1,000, and that's money that unfortunately we don't have. So we could use all the help that we can. If people would like to write out checks, you can write them out to the campaign to end the death penalty. So on that note, I'd like to next welcome Leonard Weinglass.
First, on Mumia's behalf, I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I also want to say at the outset that I'm just one of 4 lawyers who are now representing Mumia. One of my co-counsel is here, Dan Williams, seated right here. If you'll stand up for a minute. As a lawyer at the outset, I have to concede that there's no stronger argument to be made against the death penalty than to hear from Lawrence and Chuck and those who've had the experience, and thank God have lived through it, to be with us again, and to tell us what it was like. And of course, another voice that's being heard is a voice from inside, and that's the voice of Mumia Abu-Jamal. And his voice is heard not just here in the United States, where his book has sold over 70,000 copies, and the softcover is about to be published, but around the world. I've just returned from Italy last week, where 200,000 signatures were collected, calling for a new trial for Mumia. He's been made an honorary citizen of Palermo. He's about to become an honorary citizen of Venice. He's been elected to the City Council of Berlin. He's now Vice President of the National Lawyers Guild, an organization of 6,000 lawyers in the United States. published in Italian, in Dutch, in German, in Portuguese, about to be Spanish, and we're answering inquiry from the Chinese. The European Parliament has called for a new trial. So has the former president of West Germany, the president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, the foreign minister of Belgium, and for the first time in the history of Japan, 22 members of the Japanese Diet have called for a new trial for Mumia. This is a remarkable international mobilization, and I want to say that it highlights the fact that in the international arena, the United States stands alone as one of the few countries in the industrialized world, together with Japan, which has 32 on death row compared to our 3,000, to still have the death penalty. 55 countries have now abolished the death penalty, including all of the countries of Europe. Even the UN Special Tribunal on Rwanda and on Cambodia, which is considering acts of genocide, not just murder, refuses to apply the death penalty, saying that the international position on the taking of lives has moved beyond state action, which creates executions. And the United States stands as only one of 4 countries in the world which executes people for crimes committed under the age of 18. We're in the company of Bangladesh, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. And in fact, since 1977, when the death penalty was reintroduced, 10 people under the age of 18 who committed crimes under the age of 18 have been executed. Last year, 1995, there were 56 executions in the United States. That's twice as many as the previous year. But evidently, it's not enough, and it's not fast enough. Senator Dole has already gone on record calling for an acceleration of the number of people to be executed. In San Quentin, California, 1 month ago, he stood before the prison, at the prison gates, and with the television cameras going, he announced that there were 461 inmates in San Quentin awaiting execution. And he chided California for having executed only 3. And his call for a speed up, in fact, has been answered. And was answered this afternoon when President Clinton signed the 1995 Counterterrorism Act, which passed Congress. That act contains a provision that has nothing to do with terrorism, but has everything to do with the feelings of the pro-death penalty forces and the right-wing forces in the United States who want to accelerate the executions in the United States, because it calls for a severe time limit for filing habeas corpus appeals. And in the words of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, it guts what has been the central claim for human rights historically, that is the writ of habeas corpus. It guts it into a meaningless phrase in the United States. And that is the law from today forward in the United States, and it's the law that's going to be applied against Mumia. And it's the law which, if carried through, will severely restrict Mumia's right to gain the freedom that he deserves. And so I know there are going to be other spokespeople who address this particular law, but there must be a major movement against it. It's been pretty much not spoken of enough in the public arena. Senator D'Amato was one of the key members of the Senate who insisted that this provision be incorporated in the counterterrorism bill, and so it was. So it's very urgent that we stand against this bill. Mumia's case is now pending before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Last summer, after a hearing that lasted through the months of July and August and into September, we were able to prove decisively that Mumia was entitled to a new trial. that he really never had a trial, that his trial was infected with the same issues that taint most death penalty cases. Issues of race, issues of class, and in this particular case, issues of politics. We were able to show that the alleged confession, which they said Mumia uttered after the shooting, was fraudulently produced, and that the police officer who was with Mumia at the time he allegedly uttered that confession, and who was not produced at the trial because the police claimed he was on vacation and unavailable, we found him 14 years later, and he came into court to say that he was in the city of Philadelphia, 20 minutes from the courthouse, and could have come to the court on a phone call to testify to the jury that during the period of time that he was with Mumia on the night in question, he wrote in a report when he was interviewed on that night that the male Negro made no comments. The jury never heard that. Nor did the jury hear that the gun that Mumia had on the night in question, because he had been robbed several times and he was working as a cab driver, and he had a license for the gun, was a .38 caliber gun. And the prosecution used the fact that he had a gun to good advantage because a police officer, as a victim, was shot. But the pathologist who conducted the autopsy wrote in the autopsy report that the fatal bullet that he removed from the officer's brain was a .44 caliber bullet. And Mumia's gun was a .38 caliber gun. You cannot shoot a .44 caliber bullet with a .38 caliber gun. But the jury never heard that because Mumia's lawyer never read the protocol from the pathologist. And so although the pathologist testified, he was never asked about it. So what happened in Mumia's case is fairly typical of what happens in many cases. What's called defective assistance of counsel, lack of resources. He had no expert firearms witness, which he needed to rebut the prosecution's theory on the firearms. He had no investigator at the time of trial. The investigator quit after looking at just 2 witnesses and talking to them because they ran out of funds. $150 was allocated for an investigation where the prosecution had talked to over 60 witnesses. Mumia was tried before a judge who's put more people on death row than any sitting judge in the United States. As a matter of fact, he's put twice as many on death row than the judge in second place. He was tried by a prosecutor who distinguished himself by previously prosecuting and gaining a conviction against a man who allegedly murdered after raping a young woman by shooting her with a shotgun. And indeed, he did have a shotgun, which was produced at the time of his trial and used to good effect to gain the conviction. 12 years later, it turned out, after the case was reopened, that the young woman had not been shot at all. She had been stabbed with an ice pick 78 times. And in fact, the police had the ice pick, but never produced it at the trial or told his defense about it. And the man who did 12 years already of a life sentence had to be released with an apology. That was the prosecutor. His defense attorney has since been suspended from the practice of law for other reasons, but took the stand last summer and admitted he had never talked to one witness when he defended this case. The County of Philadelphia, at the time of Mumia's trial, in 1982, allocated $6,500 per death penalty case. The County of Los Angeles allocates $60,000 per death penalty case. And a commission just advised Governor Pataki of what ought to be allocated in New York State for a death penalty case, and that figure is $600,000. So you can see no one should go to trial with the type of resources that were made available to Mumia in 1982. And that's why he never had a trial. That's what we were able to show last summer, and that's what we intended to show in federal court. But now with the new counterterrorism bill, we're going to be very hard put to make any kind of a showing at all that will win in federal court. Lastly, I want to say this about you being here tonight and Mumia's case and the massive support he's received. He probably has more support than anyone now on death row. And that's something that Mumia wants to share with his brothers and sisters on death row, and always instructs all of us when we speak publicly to speak of all who are on death row. He is fortunate enough to have been a broadcast journalist, a skilled and talented writer who was able to bring attention to his case. But the other cases deserve attention as well, all equally. Having said that, I do want to say this. He is the only person on death row who has a national, organized, funded campaign to see to it that he's executed. The Fraternal Order of the Police have mobilized their very considerable national resources to see to it that Mumia is executed. Their thinking is that if Mumia Abu-Jamal can be executed, then all the rest will be vulnerable to the same. And so Mumia becomes, in their view, the logjam case on death row in the United States. And that force that we're up against has to be matched by an equivalent force in support of Mumia. And that's why I'm glad you all came here tonight in support of the position against capital punishment, but also in support of Mumia. Thank you.
Stop the killing before it starts. On September 1, 1995, New York became the 38th state in the nation to have a law authorizing the death penalty. Despite continual evidence demonstrating that the application of the death penalty is fraught with mistakes, arbitrariness, and discrimination, the Empire State, our state, regresses and reemerges into the business of premeditated executions of its own citizens. The reenactment of the death penalty requires our state to sacrifice fairness in the name of vengeance. Capital punishment is a barbaric remnant of an uncivilized society. New York State's international reputation of allegedly zealously guarding its citizens' civil liberties and civil rights has and will decline because of the death penalty. It is ironic indeed, that just 3 months after our death penalty law was passed, that South Africa decided its death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment and could not be imposed under its Constitution. The South African Constitutional Court, in overturning its country's death penalty law, found that, quote, in the ordinary meaning of the words, the death sentence is undoubtedly a cruel punishment. It is also an inhumane punishment, for it involves by its very nature a denial of the executed person's humanity, end of quote. Even if principle is not enough, there is no practical basis for the death penalty. It assures the execution of innocent people, does not deter crime, costs more, and is applied in a racially discriminatory fashion. Our state has already executed more innocent people than any other state in this country. According to a seminal study in 1987 published in the Stanford Law Review, which did research from 1900 to 1985 in this country, the study concluded that 350 innocent people from 1900 to 1985 were wrongly convicted of crimes that were punishable by death. At least 23 in the study were executed. And 8 of those innocent people, over 1/3 of the total number of innocent people murdered, were killed by the state of New York. Our criminal justice system, as you all know, is not perfect. Mistakes occur, and in a state with the death penalty, that means that some innocent people will be killed because of human error. Even the most ardent advocates of the death penalty acknowledge and accept this cost of the death penalty. What they argue is retribution. But let's remember what Dr. King told us when he was alive. When people argued about retribution, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, Dr. King told us that if we go down that road of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, America will become a blind and toothless society. No savings will be realized in safer streets and neighborhoods. By resorting to the violence of execution, the state tacitly endorses violence as an appropriate solution to problems. Legitimizing violence in any situation does not make anyone in our society safer. Advocates such as Governor Pataki assert over and over again that the death penalty is good policy because it will deter crime. No one has been able to produce conclusive evidence to prove this assertion. States that have the death penalty do not have lower crime or murder rates than states without it. Of the 20 states with the highest murder rate in 1993, 18 of these states had the death penalty. In fact, bringing this argument back home just to New York City, in 1994, and in the first 8 months of 1995, the homicide rate in New York in 94 decreased by 19% and decreased by almost 30% in the first 8 months of 1995. And as we all know, in that period, we did not have a death penalty. Moreover, the death penalty will not save tax dollars. Do not buy this argument. A 1993 study performed by Duke University for the North Carolina courts established that it cost, and listen to this, $2 million more, $2 million more per execution in North Carolina than the cost of non-capital murder case with a sentence of life imprisonment. In 1989, a New York State Department of Correctional Services study showed that the reinstitution of the death penalty here would cost us an estimated $110 million per year. And that was even before inflation. A death penalty trial is, in effect, two trials in one. First, it's a trial to determine guilt, followed immediately by a second trial to determine whether the death penalty should be imposed. This is one of the reasons death penalty trials are necessarily more lengthy, more complex, and more costly than non-death penalty cases. The people on death row in America are poor. Poor people cannot afford a dream team. There is no assurance. There is no assurance that people charged with capital crimes will have adequate or even competent legal counsel. In New York, under the Murder One statute, do not buy into the argument that it's a death penalty statute. Death penalty is just one of three options under the Murder One statute that was passed. In this statute, it provides for a capital defender's office. This is headed by Kevin Doyle. Mr. Doyle and members of the Capital Defender Office are dedicated, skilled attorneys committed to the vigorous defense of their clients. However, their funding is not adequate. Moreover, their funding is only on a year-to-year basis. They have to go back each year to the legislature in Albany, a pro-death legislature, to ask them for funding. If we care about fairness, we should get the state to provide a guaranteed 10-year funding for the Capital Defender Office. We need to do all we can to guarantee that the CDO and any private attorneys handling capital cases can and will proceed in the most independent, most vigorous, most aggressive, and most effective manner, because nothing else will suffice. History shows that the death penalty, when it is used in a racially discriminatory manner. In Georgia, a landmark 1986 study found that overall, those convicted of killing white people were 4 times more likely to be sentenced to death than those convicted of killing black people. New Yorkers, all of us, here tonight, as well as the thousands of people across the state that are not here and who are not yet in this movement, we need to be visible. We need to be vocal in our opposition to the death penalty. We cannot and should not be silent or even quiet on this matter. This is very simply an issue of conscience. The implementation of the new death penalty law here in New York does not and should not end the debate surrounding this fundamental issue. I can report to you tonight that I have crisscrossed the state and have engaged in many town hall meetings and debates on this issue. I report to you tonight that although tonight, April 24th, 1996, we do not have a majority in the state or even in the city on this issue, but I tell you tonight that I am confident that we will, yes, we will repeal this law. The only question that remains is when. And that's why we must, and I know this audience will, do everything we can to persuade others that the death penalty is wrong. And the real question becomes, are we going to be able to repeal it before anyone in our state is put to death? That is the question. So let's stop the killing before it starts. Stop the killing before it starts.
From the Buffalo Committee to Free Mumia. The people in Buffalo were smaller in number, but we're pretty active. We have a multiracial group that has been working against police brutality in the community, holding public hearings, also working around Mumia's case, picketing the federal courthouse, circulating petitions, doing community education. It's good to look out and see a lot of people at a gathering like this. And to some extent, I'm sure that we're preaching to the converted, that most people there are against the death penalty and against aspects of the system, government in this country that allows for a death penalty or apparently seems to need a death penalty. It's an honor for me to be here, and NYU has a kind of a special meaning because there's a law professor. I just asked Leonard if he's still teaching here. His name is Tony Amsterdam, and I believe he's on sabbatical. But Tony Amsterdam spearheaded, along with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, a campaign in the 1960s after documenting the racist application of the death penalty and the way it discriminates against poor people. It took about a decade to slow down the executions and then put the question squarely before the U.S. Supreme Court. And in Furman versus Georgia in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court abolished the death penalty. And that spared my life, it spared Bubba's life, and several other men who were on death row with us, and about 600 people nationwide. I feel responsibility to my experience. I don't want to talk a lot about my personal case, except to say I was shot in the back of the head while I was unarmed on the ground, and then I was charged with murder, and I was sent to death row. I had 3 trials. I was offered 8 years. I turned it down at the 3rd trial. I got 25 to life. I did 26 years, and I got out. I teach criminal justice at SUNY State University at Buffalo. Until they find out I'm there, at least I'm teaching. And it's great working with young people. I also recently did an Alternatives to Violence program with youth from the inner city, from City Honors High School, sophomores, and I learned a lot from them. The young people in this country are going to be the ones who lead us to some changes that are needed. When Bubba was talking about some of the gratuitous cruelty that went on death row, I remember an incident where a friend of mine, who's here now, Joan Potter, sitting in the back. Joan, would you raise your hand? Joan was a news reporter who came to do an interview while I was on death row, and we became friends. And her son Stephen, who was then 7 years old, did a small collage, which said basically, "Hi Chuck," and with things cut out of magazines, little pictures of cars, how you doing, and this and that. And they were pasted onto a piece of paper. And Joan tried to either send it in or bring it into the prison, and they stopped it in the package room and wouldn't allow it to come in. We theorize now, in retrospect, that they saw an Unabomber plot going on against death row from a 7-year-old. But this, for me, that kind of depicted the mentality that held power and exercised power. And as you go further up the line, I think, there's even more of a distancing between real feeling for people and creating and carrying out policies and practices in this country. The guards, some of whom couldn't even be kind, some were decent, just there trying to make a salary, and some were just corrupted by the power and took it out on the people below them. I don't really hold them responsible as much as I do people like Pataki and Clinton and Dole. I was watching a documentary on public television either last night or the night before, and it was basically a look back at the Holocaust and the construction of Hitler's death camps. And one of the people who was talking, he was looking at the old blueprints of Auschwitz and Treblinka and some of the other places. And he said that when they were originally put in place, and Treblinka, incidentally, was originally constructed to hold about 100,000 people in Poland. That's a tremendous amount of people. It's about what California has now, the state of California and its prisons. But the idea of the crematories, there was facilities to cremate bodies, but as the architect understands it, there were small crematories in the beginning for prisoners who were either killed because of being rebellious or died because they were being overworked. But it was essentially the creation of a slave labor pool to fuel Hitler's genocidal domination of the world and his plot to take over. It later became just a mass extermination camp. I hate to do this, but I can't help but draw an analogy between the erection of prisons. Since 1972, in this country there was about 200,000 prisoners inside, and today, as Manny mentioned, there's 1.5 million in prisons and jails in this country. Prison construction goes on, and more people are sent away, even as crime rates decrease. How could that be? Because laws, the pool of offenders is expanded by toughening laws. Half the people in the country, in prisons today, in this country, are in there for nonviolent offenses, for low-level drug sales and possession. That's a crime. That's a crime. Mumia's case is exciting. He brings a lot of hope, I think, to the death penalty movement. And not only to that, but to the criminal justice scene and what's going on there. I work with the man in Buffalo, an old-timer, Ed Wilkenstein. His daughter was Rachel Wilkenstein, who was co-counsel with Leonard on Mumia's case. What's exciting about Mumia's case is it not only addresses the issue of his being on death row, or of the death penalty, or of criminal justice, but it goes to the core of some of the issues that are disturbing this country and that have this country going in the direction that it is. The racism and the economic disparities that are holding people down, that are marginalizing people, and which politicians conveniently are just finding prisons to put people in who become marginalized in society. Mumia is addressing that. People are hearing him not only in this country but around the world, and I think that's where the death penalty and the criminal justice system eventually will begin to turn around when there's enough pressure from outside. State legislators, Congress, President, Governor, even so-called liberals like Mario Como, who opposed the death penalty, he built more prisons than anybody in the history of the state. You can't look to liberals for our salvation. My time is up. I have to go to the bathroom anyway. I want to thank you for being here. And please carry on the fight. It's important.